It's all yours, Wendy.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Anita and Gary and Caroline, for all that you guys do, Mary, to bring coffee and conversation to us. You know, it's hard to imagine when you sit there and say you've been doing this weekly, every week, all year long for almost 9 years, bringing in great speakers like myself. No, bringing in great speakers to keep us engaged and informed. And you know, any month that you look at the calendar, you just look at it and say, look at the variety, look at the diversity of what we're learning about, and look at how deep you've reached into our community to find really exceptional speakers. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing to keep coffee and conversation. I don't want to say keep it alive, but keep it vibrant. It's just phenomenal. Having said that, today we're going to talk about Arlington Neighborhood Village. And Anita's done a lot of the sort of what would normally be my first couple of slides describing what the village is, but I'm still going to show you those slides because I want you to get a sense of what our presentations look like when we talk to audiences, whether it's an audience of prospective members, possible volunteers, or even donors. You know, we don't use all of these slides. We don't necessarily go into this level of detail, but it's the story that we tell when we're talking about Arlington Neighborhood Village. The first picture on our slides this year is a brand new picture, and this is most of our board of directors. We've got two people who weren't able to attend for the photo shoot earlier in January, but we'll come back and we'll figure out a way to get their pictures into this photo so that we can include it on our website and make sure that everyone has an opportunity to see our board. We've got two new members this year. Anthony Nunez, who's I see him on the left, in a dark blue suit, and Marquand Jackson, who's in the middle in a white shirt. So we're thrilled to have those two members and the rest of the team. If you want to know more about individual members of our board, you can go to our website, go to the board page, and you'll see bios of everybody. But this is our progress report here in March. We're looking back at the past year, 2022. The very first thing we want to say is, as much as we're going to talk about what works, what doesn't work, and I want feedback from all of you on the call as we go through this conversation, the most important thing is to sit there and say, what a success. I wasn't here in the beginning. Gary was, Anita was, Dave were. There are many people on this call who were the founders and starters of Arlington Neighborhood Village. But when you have a moment to step back and just look at what we're doing, it's really important to celebrate where we've come and where we're going. The founders envisioned this village of neighbors helping neighbors, and that's what we've got. And we're making incredible progress towards making that a reality for so many of our neighbors. And as we go into this presentation, we'll start to talk about what our future plans are, reflective of what we're hearing from members and volunteers about our direction. Again, Anita has said this. What is an Arlington Neighborhood Village? We're the extra help that someone needs to be able to stay in their home and community. We've got 200 plus volunteers who are doing rides, errands, food bank deliveries to a very economically and culturally diverse membership. And as much as we think about the services that we do, we also know, as we've talked about, that the connection with neighbors and volunteers and with other members wards off isolation and loneliness that can sometimes come with age. We're Neighbors Helping Neighbors, founded in 2014. We'll be celebrating our 9th year anniversary. We tentatively, if you've got your calendar close by, tentatively put in a date of April 29th. That's a Saturday. We hope to have a celebration event and a volunteer recognition event on that day, but we've got to lock down our plans. But we are 9 years in the rearview mirror at this point. And we've created a great volunteer network and a strong social support network. And we know, especially because of the pandemic, that we're needed more today than ever. We know people want to stay in their homes. We know they need that extra help to remain safe and independent. We know they need help figuring out how to access those resources. And we know that they want to stay active and engaged. They want to stay connected to family, friends, and neighbors. And they want to age the way they desire. They want to make their own choices. But we know that requires help and it requires extra support. We know that there are things that become more difficult. One of the statistics we have is 1/3 of our members have challenges with either mobility, hearing, or sight. So, things have changed as we age. We know navigating those transitions is challenging. We know that also the loss of friends and family can be difficult to bear. And if you think about, hiring assistants, we certainly know that's expensive, and regularly not an option for many, many people. And even if you can or can't hire assistants, making it all pull together is really oftentimes overwhelming. And as we've said, we know people on limited incomes feel all of these challenges even more acutely. So, I once, probably 40 years ago, took a presentation class. How do you do a presentation? They said 3 things. In the beginning, tell them what you're going to tell them. In the middle, tell them. And at the end, remind them what they've just heard. So you're going to see this slide and this information time and time again. We give transportation. We're taking people to medical appointments, the grocery store, bank, and post office. We do errands for people, and errands is when the volunteer does it for the member. The member's not accompanying them. So we're doing shopping and prescription food, prescription drug pickups, and we're doing deliveries from the food bank. That's something we started during the pandemic and continues to this day. We're helping with minor household chores, whether that requires tools or just brawn. As we've talked about, we're helping with technology, both in terms of one-off solutions like my printer doesn't work, please fix it, or do I need one-on-one coaching over a series of visits to develop my skill set? And of course, we've got friendly visitors and walking buddies who are making those social connections that we've talked about, as well as getting people outside and exercising and getting that physical exercise that we know is so important in terms of maintaining a healthy lifestyle. And we've talked a little bit about our home organization and some selective help on doing some yard work. And, home organization is one of those tasks where some people call it hoarding. No. Some people call it decluttering. No. We're helping you to organize the stuff that you have. Think of it in a positive way. When we take a step back and look at who is it that we're helping, who are our members? So first of all, where we are today is about 335 members. And when I say about, that number changes. I think you guys, if you're paying attention in the community updates, every 2 weeks, we give you a list of who our new members are and a list of who our new volunteers are. I know in the past, 2 weeks ago, we had 10 and 10 of each, 10 new members, 10 new volunteers. This week, the message that went out earlier this morning, again, I think had 5 or 6 new members, an equal number, not slightly greater, new volunteers. So we are bringing in new members, new volunteers on a pretty significant basis at this point right now. Our members range in age from 58 to 102. Majority of them are female. When you look at the age, 44% are over 80, but 86% are over 70. So as much as we say member age is 58 to 102, it skews older. Not so much so for our volunteers. Our volunteers, run the gamut from as young as 18 to as old as in their 80s or 90s. But our membership skews older. Of our members, 58% of them live alone. And of those living alone, the vast majority are female. About a third of our members today are participating in our discounted membership program. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later in our presentation. And I mentioned that a third of them have mobility, eyesight or hearing challenges, and 16% represent diverse backgrounds. And these are statistics that we need to count for the grants that we have, et cetera. I see that there's a question that's come up in the chat. I can't actually see it, but Gary or Anita, if you're looking at the chat and it's a question that I should be interrupted, please do.
Well, the question, it's about daily check-ins. Are you going to talk about that later?
No, I mean, that's, one of the reasons we do these presentations, it's so good to hear that message, is that you always think, oh, I forgot that one. We do daily check-ins. We've got, what ranges from, I think, 8 to sometimes as many as 12 or 15 members who want to check in with us on a daily basis. And they either email us, call and leave a message, or call and talk to one of our office volunteers, but we communicate with them every single day. And if we don't hear from that person, we start reaching out. We'll reach out directly to the person saying, did you forget to call us? Did you forget to check in? We'll give them a little time to get back to us. And if we don't hear from them, we start elevating it over the course of the day to make sure that they're okay. So thanks for the reminder that, we count our daily check-ins. I think we did almost 1,900, a little bit more than 1,900 daily check-ins.
The question here was, this person wants a daily check-in, but she may not want a phone call from the office. Could she ask ANV to reach out to her if she doesn't call in to the office herself? And the question is,
yeah,
what
I mean,
options?
all of these things can be individually managed. If someone tells us what they want, we can put it on our records and do it. But you have to raise the question that if you're checking in on a daily basis, but you don't want us to do follow-up, if you don't check in, what happens if you have taken a fall and you can't get to your phone, you can't reach us? But I think whoever it is who's asking the question, feel free to call the office and talk with Jean or one of our office volunteers, and we'll figure out if there's a good connection that we can make on this.
And Wendy, if I can add one thing, the daily check-ins don't have to be a every day for the rest of your life sort of thing. It can be a temporary, I'm coming back from a stay in the hospital. Can somebody check on me for the next 2 weeks? Or I'm going out of town for a week. Can somebody check on my spouse every day? That kind of thing.
Absolutely true. So they can be customized. And so there's an interest to do the daily check-in. Please reach out to us. Let's talk about what makes sense. Briefly, again, throughout this whole conversation, we've talked about our volunteers. We have phenomenal volunteers. We've got, when we look back at 2022, what we call 215 active volunteers. These are people who did something for us. We've got a bigger number of volunteers in our database, but we don't want to overinflate what our numbers are. So we're really looking at who are the volunteers who did something in 2022. And in that sense, we've got about 215 active volunteers this past year. 100 of those volunteers are drivers. And Cindy brought on 96 new volunteers in 2022. I'm going to ask Cindy in a minute to talk a little bit about how she finds volunteers and what the process is for bringing them on board, but just summarizing some of the things that our volunteers have done. In this past year, we fulfilled 3,260 service requests. Breaking that down, you'll see that there were 1,370 round trip rides. And I emphasize round trip because there are other villages who count rides one by one. So our 1,370 round trip rides to another village might come out as 2,700 rides. But we do round trip rides, and that's how we count. 782 errands and 360 home chores. Anita mentioned transportation. In the beginning, transportation, pre-pandemic was about almost 3/4 of what we did. 75% of our work was transportation. It's considerably down now. It's about 42% of our effort. So there's been over the last couple of years, a big uptake in errands, and errands represent about 24% of our service requests. And then home chores, which is a broad category, represents about 11% of what we do. When you look at our volunteers, they drove more than 35,000 miles. And it's always important at this point to emphasize at their own expense. Our drivers pay for their gas. And if we all remember this past year, we watched gas prices skyrocket, and volunteers were still there raising their hands and giving people rides. If you compare that number to prior years, just back in 2021, we gave 30,000 miles. Back in the pre-pandemic 2019, we gave 28,000 miles. So our workload is back, as we say, to pre-pandemic levels. Our volunteers donated 9,100 hours of their time, and we were able to fulfill 96% of the requests. Cindy, you want to talk a little bit about bringing on new volunteers?
Here I go, unmuted. So volunteers find us in 4 main ways. The first one is word of mouth. It's current members and current volunteers just sharing how valuable A&V is and how good their experience has been. The county's 55 plus program guide is a big source for us in terms of how folks find us. We've got online postings on Volunteer Arlington and Volunteer Match. So folks who are looking online can find us that way. And then A&V outreach is also a big source. So when Wendy goes out and does presentations, or when we're at the Arlington County Fair or wherever, folks stop by a table, pick up a brochure and learn about us that way. Once someone applies online, I have them come to join me on an online training session, which is about 45 minutes. And so we do then, so kind of going through a lot of the information that Wendy's covering now so that they know all about us. And then they sign agreements and we submit them for a background check. So it's important to know that all of our volunteers have gone through a background check and are fully vetted. And then the office activates them and they're on the way.
And we're doing that so much more efficiently than we've done before. Wendy Shapiro, who has been helping to vet volunteers again for a very, very long time. Wendy Shapiro, Cindy, and Noelle at the time, developed a new intake process for volunteers. What used to take us months from beginning to end now can happen in, I can even say days. There's sometimes someone who reaches their hand, puts in a volunteer application. If the timing is set up correctly, they can get trained the next day, and they're getting their background clearance can happen again in 24 hours, and they can be activated in less than a week. And that's one of the reasons why we're successful at bringing in new volunteers, because we're showing people from the very beginning that we can run an efficient, effective organization, and we're going to make good use of their time when they donate it to us. So just drilling down a little bit more deeply into service requests, you can see that we've had an increase in service requests and volunteers over the past year. But we still recognize that we've got a gap, and that gap is in fulfilling driving requests. So I gave you verbally a little bit of this historical look at A&V. So you can see that the number of requests fulfilled from 2019 to 2022, you can see how that number, took a little bit of a dip during the first year of the pandemic, but came roaring back in 21 and 2022. You can see the percentage of transportation. I incorrectly previously mentioned 75%. It was 2/3. 2/3 of our work was transportation. But you can see now that we're sort of stabilizing at about 42% in transportation. Way back in 2019, we probably had errands in the database, but not enough to pay attention to. But then come 2020, errands, doing something for a member who was staying safe at home, became a more important percentage and part of our work. And again, the percentage of work that we're doing at home or walking buddies, these numbers exist in our database for prior years, but that little box up there also tells a story, which is we have a lot of data, but we need somebody who can spend more time looking at it. And those of us working in this area in the office, limited amount of time, you pull up what's easy to get or readily available or more timely. And it's a little bit harder for us to spend time on some of the historical numbers. So there are two important messages on this. One is, a couple messages. We're fulfilling a lot of requests, the numbers going up. We're aware of what our needs are. We still have a pretty good fill rate, but not as good as it's been historically. Historically, our fill rate has been as high as 98%. Overall, our fill rate now is a little bit better than 96%. That's nothing to laugh at. That's still success. But clearly we're comparing it to where we'd like to be and where we've been. And if you dig a little bit deeper and you look at unfilled in transportation alone, not an overall request, but simply in transportation, the unfilled transportation request was about 92.5%. So that means, 7% of our rides were not filled. So we really, many of you on the call are volunteers. You know that you're responding regularly to our request for transportation. You know that you also get special requests for us. We refer to it as dialing for drivers the day before if we have a request that's unfilled. But I'm only sharing this number with you to let you know that we are paying attention to our analytics. We are trying to manage towards that, and we're looking to improve our rate of filling transportation requests going forward, because we recognize that it's not as good as we'd like it to be.
Wendy, shouldn't that third bullet say transportation filled in 2022 was 92?
Oh, yes, it should. Yep. Thank you so much. That's a big mistake. I only want you to know that when 3 or 4 people all look at something, we still miss it. And one of the reasons we missed it was because initially that number was asterisk because we had to calculate it. And many of my reviewers didn't know what I was going to write in that box. So I take full responsibility for that mistake. And I appreciate very much hearing about it. Thank you.
Got a question here. Are there any stats on the home organizing that you've talked about, or is that too new to really have?
No. I mean, there are some stats. Again, we don't have them right now. They're built into the percentage home. When I put home in there, for those of us who've worked in the office, you know that there's, I'm collapsing a couple of things. We have something called home chores. We have something called home maintenance, and we have home organizing. So let me do the home maintenance one first. Home maintenance is if you need a volunteer who can work with tools. You have a kitchen cabinet that's askew and they need to come in and help you, straighten that kitchen cabinet. Home chores is you just need someone to help you do something in the house, but they don't need to necessarily have a handy person's skill set. So that's a home chore. And then of course we have home organizing. So that number 11%, I summarized it for this chart, but in reality, we have numbers for each one of those tasks, for all of these tasks. I mean, for different kinds of errands that we do, walking buddy and visitor, we have separate numbers for that. But this chart was just something that we could tell a picture and tell a story pretty quickly.
And Wendy, just on the home organizing piece, that sort of has waxed and waned with COVID. It launched, the true home organizing program launched right before COVID started. But then of course, as folks were reluctant to have volunteers in their homes during COVID, we weren't doing as much on home organization, but now we're ramping that back up. So that statistic will continue to grow.
There's also a question here about about the requests that were not fulfilled. Are there any trends, or can you talk about what kinds of requests are typically not filled?
Well, as you're seeing, oftentimes what we're counting there are the transportation requests. Because for many of the other requests, they're not so much time sensitive. So you in a sense, will always find a volunteer if you give it a long enough time period. If somebody needs help with a task and you look at it and go, who's going to volunteer to do that? Given enough time, someone does volunteer to do that. So it's the unfilled ones are not, I don't think that there's a storyline necessarily that runs through them. They're just the oddities and the one-offs. I know Jean hasn't been able to join us on this call, but she'd have a much better sense of what those are offhand. But they're the oddities. So when we look a little bit deeper, we talk about reducing social isolation and making sure that people feel part of the community. And there are so many things that we've already talked about. Anita shared with us at the beginning of the call, coffee and conversation, happy hour, tai chi, bocce, board games. We didn't mention pop-up picnics, which happens, in good weather on the last Friday of the month. Page turners, lunches and dine arounds. We mentioned Lunar New Year the other day, but we've got a women and a men's lunch group that meets every month at a different restaurant, and certainly our holiday parties and other celebrations. I mentioned volunteer recognition, but all of these things are getting people together and creating friendships and keeping them all connected. We've got our anniversary and volunteer recognition coming up in April. In June, we'll have our annual picnic at the Bluemont shelter. As I mentioned, these other groups are meeting weekly or monthly. We've got our Pinstripes group there in the wintertime, getting together for a picture. So we've got 5,000 people who have participated in all of these events over the course of 2022. I hope some of you see yourselves in these pictures. You know, briefly, how do we get the job done? We have a small paid staff. That's an executive director, our member services director, Jean Raday. So lucky to have Jean. We have a new member services specialist working with Jean, Mary Ellis Bowler, and she just started in January, so she's getting up to speed. Cindy is our part-time volunteer coordinator. Noelle Derman, who's off in Disneyland with her family this week, works on our grant making and our fundraising and special projects. And I think you've heard before, you know, a very episodic part-time care manager. These are paid positions. When you look at these paid positions, you sit there and say, you know, how do we sustain A&V? So we've talked before, 3 things: membership fees, grants that we apply for, individual donations. But people often ask in this presentation, when they're not familiar with A&V, you know, if you're a volunteer-run organization, why do you need money? Why are you raising money? And part of that answer is that we have expenses. And in the next slide, I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown of what those expenses are. But as much as we have expenses, again, we also have, you know, easily 50 to 60 volunteers who help us manage the organization. They help us manage it through a committee structure, like we have with Coffee and Conversation, or the events committee, or the health and wellness committee. I could name many, or they help us manage inside the office. You know, I think many of you might recognize Pete from the back of his head. Pete Oliveri, this is Larry Padberg, who was our treasurer at the time. And this is a young woman who was our paid bookkeeper. So looking, you know, to that expenses, you know, what are we paying money for? And the first thing to look at, you know, A&V is growing. So if you look at our 2022 actual expenses, total $224,000, almost $225,000. When you look at our 2023 budget, you're going to see a doubling of our expenses. And this is part of our growth and our plans for the future. So where's that growth happening? Well, the growth is happening, you know, again, you'll see in 2 basic areas: personnel and contract services. Inside of personnel, you know, what's buried in those numbers are in 2022, you know, Jean and I were both, quote, part-time. In 2023 budget, we're full-time because we're giving full-time and more to the organization. The 2023 budget includes Mary Ellis, our new member services specialist, as a full-time position. We've increased the hours of our volunteer coordinator, our development person, and our special projects person. We are going to be hiring a new communications and outreach staff member to help spread the word about A&V. By spreading the word, we'll grow our membership, we'll grow our donation pool, we'll grow our grant making. So we'll be hiring someone to do that work, and we'll be hiring someone initially in 23 on a half-time basis to help us with program support. So all of the things that we've been talking about, all of the different programs we're running, these are wonderful, but as well, those volunteers need a little bit more support to get the job done. And we want to expand and grow our programs to offer even more to our members. And we need a paid staff person to help figure out what that is and to grow and initiate the activity and then sort of turn it over to volunteers to maintain it. So likewise, in contract services, you know, some of the things that in the past we were able to do with volunteers, you know, we're now having to contract for. That picture of a bookkeeper is a perfect example. You know, Pete used to be in the office almost 40 hours a week, helping with our finances. We've been able to scale back his volunteer effort by hiring a bookkeeper who comes in every other Friday to, you know, update QuickBooks, issue checks, do our accounting, produce our monthly reports. We're also having a professional fulfill our IRS filings. Again, Pete, the volunteer, used to do what's called the 990 EZ, and that EZ meant easy. Last year, for the first time, we filled the full 990 We're creating and doing our full 990 again this year, but we're using an accounting firm to help us get that done. That accounting firm is also doing a review of our financial systems. And all of this speaks to the fact that we're growing, we're becoming a bigger organization with a broader and deeper footprint in Arlington. And we need to be able to show to our funders, to ourselves, and to others that we have the financial systems in place so that you can be assured that the funds we're bringing in are being well spent and properly spent. And the way you do that is by having a financial system review. We've got money in the budget for contract services for a new program we're starting this year called the Senior Ambassador Program. And through that program, we're going to produce a handbook of all of the resources that are available for older adults in Arlington. That handbook is going to exist in paper, but also we'll put it up on the web at some point. But we're going to bring on 25 new volunteers to help us be ambassadors in communities throughout Arlington, spreading the word and answering questions and being the front line, helping older adults to know what services are available and where they can go for help. The Senior Ambassador Program exists in places like Fairfax and Loudoun down in Alexandria, but Arlington hasn't had one. So we put in some grants, we asked for some support. We received 2 grants, we have a 3rd one in the works to help us bring on a new Senior Ambassador Program. So when you look at things like both personnel and contract services, the investment there is in human resources to help us get our job done. I should mention that another investment we're making, and this is part of the investment looking to the long term, is that the board has given approval to include a benefits package for our paid staff. You know, again, if we're going to recruit and hire the best and keep them for the long term, we've got to do more than pay an hourly wage. So we are looking at and assessing the types of benefits that we can offer. There's money built into the budget to offer those benefits, and the board will make a decision in April on what that benefit package looks like. But for those of you who've worked in any kind of business organization, you know that benefits usually or generally are an additional 25% or more above your salary level. So that's what we spend our money on. That's what we're investing in. In addition to making those people investments, you're also seeing management improvements. So, you know, the fact that we are giving such phenomenal attention to bringing on new members, processing renewals. You know, this is for those of you who've been in the office, this is a whiteboard that's behind Jean's desk. That's the pipeline of new members, prospects, people who have contacted us. They're interested in becoming a member. There are conversations that are held. We make sure they understand A&V and what it is, but we move them through this pipeline from this, you know, on the left all the way through to the right to membership. And again, when you look at the number of new members that came on board in 2022, I believe the number was 77 new members. It's very high renewal rate, but that's because of the good work that's happening in the office with Jean, and now Jean and her new staff, Mary Ellis Bowler, and the member intake volunteers who go out and do the home interviews for all of our potential new members. Cindy's already talked about volunteer intake. We've had an enormous response during COVID. You know, as you guys know, we never shut down. We work continuous. Volunteers worked continuously serving members. We have, and I'm starting to speed up because I now know that I'm working against the clock. We have phenomenal partnerships that have been strengthened with organizations like APA and AFAC and Culpeper Garden. We're seeing new members coming from those partnerships. We're providing services to people in those facilities. We've brought on new member services. Tech coaching's already talked about. Jean has also been trained and certified as a notary. So anybody who needs notary services, just call the office. We've got an aggressive and growing pen pal program happening between our members and students at Campbell Elementary that Noel put in place. You know, it started last year. It's growing this year. We've had really good success with our grant writing and bringing in new support from philanthropic and others in the community, as well as raising and increasing the number of individual donations that we receive. We've, you know, professionalized our bookkeeping and IT support. We're going deeper and deeper on our policies, and our database is working. I know that for some of us, we remember prior years where we had problems with the database, but it's really been stabilized.
Wendy, can you talk a little bit about the physical office space
Yeah, and
and
another
the
thing
rental agreement?
yeah, I think all of you know that we're at Church of the Covenant. We're up one flight of steps, but it's handicapped accessible from other parts of the church. That was a 300 square foot office that Jean, myself, and at times 2 office volunteers sat in, and sometimes Pete. But one of the decisions we made a year ago, again, was an investment, was that we needed to double our space. One, we had more people coming into the office. They couldn't sit on top of each other, answer the phones, and have all that noise in the background. But as well, we were bringing in new technology equipment. So we doubled our space. We've got, a conference table upstairs. I work in the upstairs space. We've got 2 or 3 workstations up there that Pete can come and work in, and others can come and work in. But we've doubled our space at the church. Sadly, it's up 2 flights of steps. But we made an investment in our space as well as other kinds of physical improvements. We were lucky in that we got used furniture that matches from AIM. They were having a yard sale over a year ago, and we went in for $300. We were able to buy 3 desks, chairs, tables, etc. It was a great addition to our facility. So, all of what I've been saying is that we are A&V now, as people envisioned back in 2014, an essential part of senior services in Arlington and an important part of the senior safety net. Part of what gets us into that senior safety net is that we have a great discounted membership program. We wanted, and the board decided that we want, and I would say the founders decided in the very beginning, and the board has done work through the past several years to reinforce that we didn't want our membership fee to be a barrier to participation. So we've always had the financial aid fund was seeded in the very beginning with a very generous anonymous donation of $5,000. But over time, we have raised money for our financial aid fund. And what that has permitted us to do is to grow our participation in our discounted membership program. And not only have we been able to grow that participation, but we've also been able to make it friendlier. So the board in December of 2020, which is over 2 years ago, but sort of midst of the pandemic, they took a look at our financial aid program, and where it had been prior for income under a certain dollar amount, everyone paid $100. They made it a sliding scale. So depending on income, $49,000, $39,000, or $29,000, and the discounted membership fee can be as little as $150 or $25. And we still have members that we've been helping through the pandemic. We refer to them as temporary members, but the issue is they pay nothing. And these are people who are absolutely at risk and in need, and A&V needs to be able to help them. So we're at the point now that about a third of our membership participates in the discounted membership program. A&V is thrilled, our board is thrilled, our volunteers are thrilled, our membership is thrilled. It's really an important, posture that we've taken in Arlington as a whole and amongst villages in the region and in the nation. I actually I'm reluctant to say it because you never want to pat yourself on the back too much. But I think A&V is leading the way in terms of membership open to folks of all economic means. Now, that's leading the way, and I should probably say amongst villages that have some kind of paid membership program. There are villages that are all volunteer and have very low, if no, membership fees. So, I have to take back my patting a little bit. But for a village that has paid staff and expenses to the extent that we have, we really are a leader in terms of opening our membership to folks throughout the county. And we can do that because we've had great fundraising campaigns and successful grant competitions. Our donors are very generous. We do a great campaign on an annual basis. Our donors are generous in making those donations. And we have applied for competitive grants where we have been identified and won those competitive grants. So all said, what's ahead? We've had a little bit here of looking in the rearview mirror as to what we did in 22 prior years, how we got there, but where are we going? And where we're going is we're continuing to grow, and I mentioned it again, the number of new members, new volunteers coming on in January, seeing those numbers in February, seeing Jean's, bulletin board behind her. We are growing to meet the demand for help aging in place across the county. As we meet that demand by members for services, we also have to meet the demand for more volunteers to fulfill those services. We grow hand in glove. The board approved a 5-year strategic plan in April of last year, which is our roadmap for growth. That strategic plan is up on our website. We are continuing to increase our internal capacity. I went over the investments that the board has approved for our activities in 23 and beyond. We have phenomenal partnerships with other senior serving organizations across the county and with the County Department of Human Services and the County Department of Community Development. And we're growing those partnerships and strengthening them. We continue to strengthen our financial aid fund so that the membership fee is not a barrier. We're looking to diversify our income, to do more in the corporate sector, and to bring on more corporate supporters, because we want to be able to not have some one-off, activities, but have a continuous stream of funding. And we want to have better data. Using data to drive our decisions is really important. And I've showed you some of the data gathering we're doing. We need to do more. We've actually got an economics professor from GW who's helping us with a special project this year, taking a look at our membership and our membership fee and helping us to decide future direction. One of the things we did this past year, I think it launched the end of September, was a brand new website, anvarlington.org. And if you haven't been there, go there now. All of the pictures on this website are our pictures. These are real people. These are not photoshopped pictures of older adults. I think you guys all recognize Barbara and Elfrida in this picture. We have great members. It's a really rich website. We post our community updates on that website, so you can always go to the website to find the community update. We've got a great calendar. We keep it up to date so that you can go into the calendar, find out who the coffee speaker is, easily find the link. But the website is an important active tool. And of course, we hear from our members. We hear from our members all the time about the good that we're doing, how we are helping them live a rich, full life, and how much they appreciate our volunteers and how much our volunteers appreciate our members. It's a two-way street here. This was Christmas at St. Andrews. We made people do what every family, is want to do, which is come together for a group shot. So we're really pleased that we got people to come, and we got most people in the picture. There are a couple of people on the edges that maybe we didn't get. I think some of you in the middle can recognize John Lacey from way back when. So John continues to be involved with us in the volunteer. Many people in this picture that we can all take a look at and say, I know that person. But we've got great celebrations. We're a wonderful village. And the reason we do this all is because of all of you, our members, our volunteers, our donors, our supporters. We've got a shot here of our office volunteers. They got together for their own happy hour in February. Carolyn up there is with her cat watching Zoom, our pen pal program, the games activities that you see with Rosalind and Gary and Barbara and others, and Anita, Elise, and Nancy at our picnic. So I know that there are a couple of more questions in chat. I am going to come out of the PowerPoint so I can see you and answer and talk about it, get feedback from you. And I know it's 11 o'clock, I'm sorry, but get feedback from you in terms of what we shared or any questions that you've got. And I'm quickly looking into the chat to see if there's anything in here that we didn't get.
Well, there was a question for you when you were talking about partnerships and programs, to maybe talk about the continuum of care that Elena Nelson has been managing, and also our partnership with the Northern Virginia Fall Prevention Alliance and the SAIL program.
Sure. At some point when you're doing a presentation like this, you realize there's so much to talk about. And sometimes we don't get all of it in, or we don't get the special attention that it needs. Elena has, over the past years and continuing during COVID, done a continuum of care presentation about 3 times a year at one of the senior centers, where she's gotten representatives from some of the home care agencies, some of the independent and assisted living facilities, and some of our hospice facilities to talk about what that continuum is and how A&V is a part of that continuum. Elena wants to continue, and we all want to continue that program in 2023. We've got to make that extra effort to connect with the county and with the Department of Parks and Rec. I mean, that's another group that I didn't mention, great partnership that we have with DPR. Again, going through one of these efforts, you just said, oh my God, how could I not include them? And we have, the Northern Virginia Falls Prevention Alliance. Sue Arnold and Beverly Canizero are instructors for the last 5 years, if not longer, running an incredibly successful SAIL class, Staying Active and Independent for Life, a falls prevention program. Again, through senior centers throughout the county, currently at Love or Run. It's been so successful that we've got more people signing up for SAIL. There's a waiting list. So we're talking to DPR and how we can, get even more. We need more SAIL instructors, to tell you the truth, to be able to do more SAIL classes. I know Pat's got her hand up, so let me turn to Pat.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any statistics on demographics on where our volunteers and members are located in Arlington.
Pat, we have some, but that's part of the storyline of we need more people to do more analysis. So, we've done some simple analysis based on zip code, because one of our funders, really likes to see who we're supporting in South Arlington and in the Columbia Pike area, the Washington Forest Foundation. So we are able to do some simple analytics that look at zip code and count how many people live in the odd versus even zip codes. So we know that 30% of our members are living in South Arlington, for example. We sadly have less information on our volunteers. Our volunteers, we really end up sort of knowing their name, their email, and their address, but we don't necessarily, we get some information on age and sometimes have information on race or ethnicity, but we need to get more so that we can report more of that back out to you. But again, I think the stats on North versus South Arlington are somewhat akin to the membership stats. About 30% are in South Arlington. But I think same story. We have a richness of data that we're not tapping into, and we need to think about the questions, and then we need to think about how we grab that data. One of the things Pete did this past year at the end of the year was, learn how to do pivot tables in Excel. So, we can now do counts of some things at the push of a button that used to take, a couple of hours to do. So all of the data analysis matters. Liz, I see your hand up. Unmute yourself.
Okay, unmuted. I had a question. I've got many friends who don't have children or relatives. Are there any programs to help them figure out stuff like what do they do with their things if they need to move or die, or just how to figure things out legally?
Well, so there's assistance that we can offer. There's some assistance, not specifically the last end of your question, but the home organizing group of people have some ideas. The volunteers who've gone through that training have a sense of helping people sort through things and some resources perhaps to help them get rid of things. Folks in our office, have some expertise they developed over time. So if a member calls us and says, I've got this that I'm looking to get rid of, we can give them some suggestions on things they might do. We certainly suggest, for example, people use Nextdoor to get rid of some things. And if someone can't post on Nextdoor themselves, we'll generally be able to find a volunteer who might be able to post some things on Nextdoor or Facebook Marketplace. But, these are all kinds of individual one-off issues that we help our members with as best we can. We're not a legal, we're not providing ourselves legal advice. And, we don't have a set of vetted estate attorneys that we'd offer, but we have had some really qualified people in Arlington as coffee and conversation speakers. People have heard those conversations. They develop a degree of trust in the person knows what they're talking about and might find some support through that effort. But things happen in different ways.
That,
go
I
ahead.
think we should wrap it up, Wendy, but on behalf of everybody here and not here today, you are the best. We just are so very fortunate. And when we found you, it's more than 5 years ago now. It's hard to believe, time flies, but we all love you, not just because you're such an effective leader and manager, but because you're such a good person. And you're exactly the kind of person we need to have leading Arlington Neighborhood Village.
Well, I love telling the story, Anita, that Joan Smith and I went to 2 coffee and conversations. The first one was on ADU at APA, where she had just done an ADU unit in her house and we wanted to hear the county guy talk. And the second was, when you had some speaker coming in to talk about experience at the Westover Garden. And the speaker was late and you got up there and you were filling time and said A&V is looking for an interim executive director. And I had retired at that point, and Joan nudges me, in my gut, going, I'm going to tell them about you. I wasn't looking for a job. I didn't know anything about the organization. And you and I ended up having coffee, I think at Panera or someplace in the Boston area. And after coffee, you pushed me to have a conversation with Elise and 2 other board members. And after that conversation, we said, let's do something on an interim basis. And probably within a couple of weeks, we both decided that we were going to stop dating and get married. Best decision I ever made. And, I've had a phenomenal time working with great people. We're only successful because of all of the volunteers and team members we have. It's not any one person doing this job. We are just a force to be reckoned with. And I get to represent the organization through efforts like this, but it's not me. Trust me, I know how much everybody does every day to make a difference in older people's lives in Arlington. And we are grateful for all of that. If people have individual questions and they want to stay on the call, for a couple of minutes, I'm happy to stay on the call and answer those questions. I know, and I know that people are getting off, feel comfortable getting off. But if there's a specific question you want to cover, I'm happy to stay on for a little bit longer.
Gary, why don't you stop recording? This will be on the YouTube A&V
I'm
site.
just going to quickly go over them. We noted that there are, one of the people said as a driver, they're seeing, a lot more members who need assistance, walkers, travel wheelchairs, and things like that, even getting into medical appointments. And we agree. I mean, one of the things we noted is that our membership skews older, and those older people who joined are just getting older and older as time goes on. So 9 years in, someone who joined at 80 is going to be 89 now. So things like walkers and wheelchairs and canes become much more an aspect of their life.